Ever wonder why a man pulls back, even when his eyes tell you the complete opposite? Picture this scenario. You sense that magnetic pull between you both, yet suddenly he becomes distant, cold, almost hostile toward you. What you mistake for lack of interest is actually the reverse. It's his deepest vulnerability hiding behind avoidance patterns. Over a century ago, Sigmund Freud recognized that human behavior gets driven by unconscious forces that remain hidden from us. When a man avoids you, he's not fighting against you. He's battling the darkest corners of his own mind. These struggles are as ancient as humanity itself and follow patterns that Freud decoded with surgical precision. In the coming minutes, you'll discover 6 hidden signals that reveal why male avoidance paradoxically signals intense attraction. These insights will transform your understanding of interpersonal dynamics forever. If you want to explore the secrets of the male psyche further, subscribe to this channel right now. The first and perhaps most powerful signal shows itself through his fear of your emotional power over him. Freud called this the castration complex, and it manifests just as clearly today as it did back then. Imagine this: a man encounters a woman who fascinates him, not just superficially, but in a way that touches his deepest layers. Suddenly he feels his usual control beginning to crumble. His thoughts circle around her. His emotions become unpredictable. In this moment, an ancient mechanism activates in his unconscious: the fear of emotional castration. Freud realized that the castration complex extends far beyond sexual anxieties. It represents the fundamental male fear of power loss, control loss, giving up psychic independence. When you let him sense this power over his emotions without meaning to, you trigger his most archaic fears. You recognize this signal when he suddenly behaves overly masculine when you're near. He talks louder, gestures more dominantly, seeks validation from other men. It's as if he must prove to himself that he's still the same strong man. Yet precisely this behavior reveals the opposite. He feels threatened by the intensity of his own feelings toward you. The castration complex in modern relationships also expresses itself through his compulsive need to emotionally diminish you. He makes remarks about your appearance, your decisions, your dreams, not from malice, but from the unconscious fear that you might become too powerful. The more you mean to him, the stronger this urge becomes to control or avoid you. Freud understood that this fear is rooted in early childhood. The little boy experiences his mother as all-powerful. She nourishes him, comforts him, has complete control over his well-being. Simultaneously, he must separate from her to become an independent man. This conflict between longing and the desire for liberation shapes his entire later relationship with women. So if you're a woman who radiates strength, intelligence, and emotional depth, you will inevitably activate this primal conflict in him. You represent simultaneously everything he wishes for and everything he fears. You are the nourishing mother and the threatening power at once. The paradoxical thing about the castration complex is this: the more a man avoids a woman, the stronger his attraction to her often becomes. The avoidance isn't disinterest, but self-protection. He instinctively senses that you have the power to tear down his carefully built emotional walls. Observe his behavior closely. Does he get nervous when you succeed? Does he make derogatory comments about strong women in general? Can't he look you in the eyes for long? These are all signs that he perceives you as a threat to his emotional autonomy. Freud taught us that the unconscious never lies. When a man overly emphasizes how independent he is, how little he needs women, how important his freedom is to him, then he reveals exactly the opposite. He fights against his deepest longing for emotional connection because he perceives it as a danger to his identity as an autonomous man. The tragic irony lies in the fact that exactly the women who fascinate him most are also those from whom he flees most. They embody his deepest longing and his greatest fear in one person. Have you ever noticed how a man becomes stronger the more he tries to withdraw from you? It's as if his avoidance only makes the truth of his feelings more obvious. But this is just the first signal. The second is even more subtle and dangerous. It shows itself in the way he looks at you when he thinks you don't see it. Almost nobody recognizes this pattern, although it has determined men's behavior for thousands of years. The second signal reveals itself in the frightening way he suddenly treats you like his mother, without realizing it, without wanting it, but with an intensity that exposes his deepest childhood wounds. Picture this. You've spent wonderful time together, the chemistry works, everything flows. Then, out of nowhere, his tone changes. He becomes either overly respectful, almost reverent, or rebellious and defiant, like a teenager rebelling against his mother. This drastic change is no coincidence. You've unconsciously activated his mother imago. Freud discovered that every person carries an unconscious image of their mother within them, the imago. This imago isn't the real mother, but a psychic projection of all early emotional experiences with the first woman in his life. When you embody certain qualities that trigger his mother imago, he will no longer perceive you as an independent person, but as a projection surface for his unresolved mother complexes. You recognize this signal through his contradictory behavior. On one hand, he seeks your closeness with almost childlike longing. He wants to be cared for, understood, loved unconditionally. Simultaneously, he rebels against exactly this longing because it reminds him of his early dependency. The result, he withdraws, becomes cold, treats you like a controlling mother he must fight against. Pay attention to how he reacts when you give him advice or take care of him. A man who confuses you with his mother will interpret even well-meant care as an attack on his autonomy. Offer him a glass of water, he feels patronized. Ask how his day was, he feels controlled. Show concern for his health, he feels infantilized. Freud recognized that the mother imago gets especially strongly activated by women who possess three specific qualities: nurturing nature, emotional intelligence, and the ability to really see him. When you embody this combination, you will inevitably trigger his deepest mother complexes. The frightening thing about this mechanism is its unconsciousness. He doesn't notice that he's confusing you with his mother. He interprets his emotional reactions as rational decisions. When he withdraws, he believes it's because of your characteristics, not his projected fears. The mother imago also shows itself in his language usage. Listen carefully. Does he use words like always and never when talking about women? Does he say sentences like, women always want to control, or you're all the same? These generalizations are a clear sign that he doesn't see you as an individual person, but as the projection of his mother imago. A particularly telling signal is his reaction to your independence. Paradoxically, a man who confuses you with his mother will feel threatened by both your care and your autonomy. If you're too caring, he feels controlled. If you're too independent, he feels neglected. It's a vicious circle rooted in his early mother-child relationship. Freud taught that the solution to this conflict is only possible through conscious engagement with the mother imago. As long as a man doesn't recognize this projection, he will experience every woman who touches his deepest emotional layers as a repetition of his first love relationship. The tragic irony lies in the fact that you activate his mother imago precisely because you can offer him what he wishes for most: unconditional love, emotional security, deep understanding. Yet exactly these qualities remind him of his early dependency and trigger his flight instinct. Observe whether he categorizes you: the caring mother, the controlling mother, the rejecting mother. This categorization reveals that he doesn't perceive you as a complex individual person, but as a fragment of his own psychological history. Have you ever noticed how a man simultaneously seeks your closeness and flees from it? How he yearns for your care, but perceives your attention as a threat? But the mother projection is only the tip of the iceberg. The third signal is even more insidious. It hides behind what looks like positive distraction at first glance, but in truth represents a sophisticated avoidance strategy for his deepest fears. The third signal shows itself in his sudden obsession with everything else, his job, his sports, his hobbies, while he emotionally avoids you. Freud called this sublimation, and it's one of the most sophisticated forms of male self-deception. Imagine this: he was close to you, opened up, allowed intimacy, then seemingly without reason, he throws himself with fanatic energy into other areas of life. Suddenly he works late into the night, trains excessively, immerses himself in projects that were previously unimportant. He seems productive, fulfilled, busy. What you don't recognize: he's fleeing from the intensity of his feelings for you by redirecting his emotional and sexual energy. Freud discovered that sublimation is a defense mechanism where unacceptable impulses get channeled into socially acceptable activities. When a man is overwhelmed by you, but simultaneously afraid of this overwhelming feeling, he will unconsciously shift his entire energy into other areas. The passion that actually belongs to you, he invests in his career, his body, his goals. You recognize this signal by the intensity of his substitute activities. It's not normal busyness, it's an almost manic focus on everything else except you. He talks for hours about his new project, constantly posts about his workouts, meticulously plans his professional future. Every area of his life suddenly gets the attention that should actually belong to you. The insidious thing about sublimation is its social acceptance. Nobody will criticize a man for being too ambitious, too athletic, or too goal-oriented. On the contrary, these qualities get admired. He can disguise his emotional flight from you as personal development without anyone questioning his true motives. Pay attention to how he talks about his new passions. The language is revealing. He uses terms like focus, discipline, control, performance. These words betray his unconscious desire to regain the control he loses in your presence. Sublimation gives him the feeling of being master of his emotions. Freud recognized that sublimation occurs particularly frequently in men who have strong creative or ambitious impulses. The more intelligent and talented a man is, the more sophisticated his emotional avoidance becomes. He creates masterpieces, builds companies, achieves athletic peak performances, all to avoid feeling how much you move him. The cruel paradox of sublimation lies in its effectiveness. While he channels his energy into other areas, he actually becomes more successful, more attractive, more admirable. You see him grow and flourish, but not in relation to you, but in flight from you. His successes become monuments to his emotional refusal. Observe the timing patterns. When does he throw himself into his projects, often directly after moments of intimacy or emotional closeness with you? It's as if he must neutralize the threat of connection with you through intense activity. The deeper the preceding intimacy, the more excessive his subsequent distraction. A particularly revealing sign is his reaction when you show interest in his new passions. A man who sublimates will paradoxically be dissatisfied or even irritated when you take interest in his substitute activities. Unconsciously, he senses that you see through his escape route. Freud taught that sublimation works in the short term, but can never satisfy the original needs in the long term. A man can climb mountains, found companies, or create artworks. The longing for emotional intimacy gets only temporarily numbed, never erased. The tragic irony lies in the fact that his successes achieved through sublimation only make him more irresistible to you, while simultaneously raising the wall between you. He becomes the man you fall even deeper in love with while he distances himself further from you. Do you recognize the pattern? The more successful he becomes in other areas, the more he avoids emotional intimacy with you. It's as if he transforms his feelings for you into performance. But even the most skillful sublimation cannot hide the fourth signal. A regression so primitive that it completely destroys his adult facade and turns him into a frightened child. The fourth signal is the most frightening. He literally becomes a child when genuine emotional maturity is demanded of him. This regression is so obvious that it's painful to observe, and yet most women overlook its true meaning. Picture this. You're having a deeper conversation about your shared future, about your needs, about the relationship itself. Suddenly, not just his behavior changes, but his entire personality. The adult man you know disappears. In his place appears a defiant child who sulks, stays silent, runs away, or falls into childish tantrums. This transformation isn't a character flaw. It's an unconscious flight into earlier developmental stages. Freud recognized regression as one of the most primitive defense mechanisms. When psychological stress becomes too great, the unconscious flees into earlier, supposedly safer developmental phases. A man who avoids you regresses because the emotional complexity of a mature relationship overwhelms his psychological capacities. This signal shows itself in various childish behavior patterns. He reacts with silence when communication is demanded, like a defiant child who refuses to answer. He suddenly develops irrational fears of responsibility that he carries effortlessly in other areas of life. His language becomes simpler, his arguments more primitive, his emotional reactions disproportionately intense. Particularly revealing is his reaction to your emotional needs. A regressing man will experience your requests for emotional intimacy as overwhelming demands, exactly like a child experiences adult expectations as unbearable. He feels overwhelmed, helpless, trapped, and reacts correspondingly immaturely. Pay attention to his body language. Crossed arms, averted gaze, hunched shoulders, the classic defensive posture of a child. His facial expressions become expressionless or exaggeratedly childish. Sometimes he even falls into a slightly altered tone of voice, as if a younger version of himself was speaking. Freud understood that regression occurs particularly strongly when a man is confronted for the first time with a woman who emotionally challenges him. You demand not just his attention, but his emotional maturity, his capacity for intimacy, his willingness to be vulnerable. These demands activate fears that are rooted in his earliest childhood. The insidious thing about regression is its self-reinforcement. The more childishly he behaves, the less seriously you take him. The less seriously you take him, the more misunderstood he feels, and regresses further. A vicious circle develops where both sides become increasingly frustrated. A particularly clear sign of regression is his handling of conflicts. Instead of developing adult solution strategies, he flees into childish patterns. He hides, lies, blames others, or hopes problems will disappear by themselves. These strategies worked in his childhood. As an adult, they're destructive. Also observe his relationship with authority figures in his life. A regressing man will often unconsciously search for a mother figure who solves his problems for him. Simultaneously, he rebels against any form of leadership or responsibility. You become the unwanted mother figure he must fight against to assert his autonomy. Freud taught that regression is a desperate attempt by the psyche to return to a state where the world was simpler and more controllable. For a man, this means back to a time before women were complex emotional beings, before intimacy required courage, before love meant risk. The tragic irony of regression lies in its self-destructive nature. The more he behaves like a child, the less attractive he becomes to you as an adult woman. He destroys exactly what he's trying to protect, your connection to him. The most frightening thing about this signal is its universality. Even the strongest, most successful men can regress into childish patterns when confronted with a woman who touches their deepest emotional layers. Have you ever experienced how an otherwise strong man suddenly becomes helpless and childish as soon as genuine intimacy is demanded? How he seems to shrink before your eyes? But regression is only the precursor to the fifth signal. a psychological mechanism so paradoxical that it makes men destroy what they desire most out of pure fear of loss. The fifth signal is the cruelest paradox of the male psyche. He consciously sabotages what makes him happy because the fear of loss is more unbearable than the actual loss itself. Freud called this repression, and it functions according to the perverse logic, what I don't have, I also can't lose. Picture this. You experience beautiful moments together. The chemistry is perfect. Everything feels right. But instead of enjoying these happy moments, he unconsciously begins to destroy them. He provokes arguments, creates distance, does things he'll later regret. What looks like self-sabotage is actually a desperate attempt to regain control over his fears of loss. Freud discovered that the unconscious often acts preventively. Instead of passively waiting for a possible loss, it actively stages the loss. This way, it regains the illusion of control. If he loses you because he sabotaged the relationship, it feels less painful than if you left him of your own accord. You recognize this signal by his destructive timing. Precisely in the most beautiful moments, when intimacy is greatest, he suddenly becomes cold, provocative, or hurtful. It's as if he can't bear happiness because it intensifies the fear of losing it. The more intense his feelings for you become, the stronger his urge to destroy this intensity. The repression of fear of loss also shows itself in his irrational future anxieties. He paints detailed pictures of how you could leave him, how the relationship would fail, what problems could arise. These mental scenarios aren't realistic preparation. They're repression mechanisms meant to help him emotionally distance before the inevitable loss occurs. Pay attention to his language when he talks about the future. Does he use formulations like, if we break up, when this is over, or as long as it lasts? These linguistic patterns reveal that he's already mentally preparing for loss instead of enjoying the present. Freud understood that this repression is rooted in early loss experiences. Perhaps his mother emotionally neglected him. Perhaps his father disappeared. Perhaps his trust was broken in childhood. These early wounds program his unconscious to regard loss as inevitable. The insidious thing about fear of loss repression is its self-fulfilling prophecy. By constantly anticipating and preparing for loss, he creates exactly the conditions that lead to actual loss. His fear of your turning away becomes the cause of your turning away. A particularly telling sign is his behavior after intense, happy moments with you. Instead of deepening this closeness, he withdraws, becomes moody, or seeks arguments. It's as if he must neutralize happiness to be able to psychologically survive. Also observe how he reacts to your expressions of love. A man who represses his fear of loss will paradoxically become restless or even anxious when you show him your love. Your affection intensifies his fear of loss instead of calming him. The more you give, the more he fears losing. Freud taught that repression never eliminates the repressed material. It only shifts it into the unconscious, where it works even more powerfully. A man can hide his fear of loss from himself, but it will steer his actions all the more strongly. The tragic irony lies in the fact that he destroys exactly what could give him the greatest security, a deep, trusting relationship with you. His fear of loss becomes the guarantee of loss. The cruelest thing about this mechanism is its invisibility. He doesn't notice that he's sabotaging. He believes he's being realistic, careful, reasonable. The repression is so complete that he cannot recognize his own motives. Have you ever noticed how a man seems to fear happiness? How he suddenly creates problems in the most beautiful moments that weren't there before? But even the powerful repression of fear of loss gets surpassed by the sixth and final signal, an inner conflict so fundamental that it threatens the foundations of his identity as a man and forces him to an impossible choice between his heart and his social self-image. The sixth and most devastating signal shows itself in his inner war between what he feels and what he believes he's allowed to feel. Freud's superego, the internalized voice of social expectations, fights against his authentic emotions and forces him into emotional self-denial. Picture this. In your most intimate moments, you see in his eyes a deep longing, a vulnerability that touches your heart. But the next moment he closes himself off again, becomes hard, distant. What you're experiencing is the moment when his superego wins. The internalized voice of all social messages about true masculinity drowns out his authentic feelings. Freud recognized the superego as that part of the psyche that anchors social norms, parental commands, and cultural expectations within us. In men, this superego is particularly rigidly shaped by messages like, "Men show no weakness, emotions are feminine, dependence is failure, control is strength." These internalized commands become inner judges that condemn every authentic emotional impulse. You recognize this signal through his schizophrenic behavior between private and public moments. Alone with you, he can be tender, vulnerable, emotional. As soon as others are present or he feels reminded of social expectations, he transforms into a caricature of masculinity. The superego has taken over and censors his true feelings. Pay attention to how he talks about his emotions, if he addresses them at all. He uses formulations like, "I shouldn't," "it's wrong," "it's not proper," or "that's not masculine." This language reveals the inner judge that condemns his feelings for you as a violation of his male self-image. The superego also shows itself in his exaggerated compensatory actions. After moments of intimacy or emotional openness, he becomes demonstratively masculine. He talks about sports, makes sexist jokes, emphasizes his independence, or flirts ostentatiously with other women. These behaviors are penance rituals with which he wants to appease his superego. Freud understood that the superego conflict is particularly tormenting because both sides represent legitimate needs. On one hand, the man longs for emotional connection, intimacy, and authentic love. On the other hand, he wants to be a respected, strong man in society. These two needs seem incompatible, and the superego usually decides in favor of social conformity. A particularly revealing sign is his reaction to your emotional needs in the presence of others. What he can understand and share privately becomes a threat to his male identity publicly. He will ignore you, belittle, or even humiliate you, not from malice but from panicked fear of the judgment of his internalized social judge. Also observe his relationship with other men. A man in superego conflict will constantly have to prove his masculinity. He will measure himself against others, compete, differentiate. Every weakness, every emotion, every dependence gets perceived as a threat to his social position. The cruel thing about superego conflict is its cultural reinforcement. While society superficially advocates for emotional men, emotionally open men in reality often get perceived as weak, unattractive, or unmasculine. The superego reflects this social double standard. Freud taught that the superego emerges through early imprinting, but gets reinforced throughout life by social expectations. A man who avoids you fights not just against his own fears, but against millennia of cultural programming that defines emotional openness as male weakness. The tragic irony lies in the fact that exactly the qualities that would make him a lovable partner, empathy, vulnerability, emotional depth, get classified by his superego as threats to his male identity. The most frightening thing about this conflict is its self-reinforcement. The more he suppresses his true feelings, the more he alienates himself from himself. The more alienated he becomes, the more incapable he becomes of authentic intimacy. A vicious circle of emotional self-denial develops. Have you ever experienced how the same man who opens his soul to you in private moments treats you like a stranger in public? How he jumps back and forth between two completely different personalities? These 6 signals reveal the frightening truth. When a man avoids you, he's not fighting against you. He's fighting against the darkest, most powerful forces of his own psyche. Freud's greatest insight was that the unconscious never lies. The intensity of his avoidance is the measure of his hidden longing. What hidden truth in your own emotional life could forever change your understanding of love and attraction if you had the courage to recognize it? Drop a comment below telling me what state you're watching from. I read every single comment and love hearing from our community of people who want to understand deeper. If this video changed your perspective on male behavior, smash that like button and subscribe for more psychological insights. Share this with someone who needs to recognize these hidden signals. It could revolutionize their understanding of relationships.